Ladies and gentlemen, long time no see. It's been a little while, but I figured I would do something that I believe I did back in 2022. I don't know if I did it in 2023, where I decided to actually rank every college football team based on a tier list. This is every FBS team. I believe Jacksonville State is included in here. You know what? I don't think Kennesaw State is in here, the newly FBS team. But other than that, some weird logos. But we're just going to go through this entire list. You can see the most important thing when it comes to a tier list. I'm going to quickly explain this, and then I know you guys want me to get to it. It's how you label the categories. So you can see I've got playoff locks. There's going to be 3 or 4 teams in that. Teams that I am sure, unless something catastrophic happens, are making the playoff. The contenders kind of speaks for itself. Teams that could make it. Solid bowl team, that's an 8-win team. That's a 9-3 team in a bad conference. That's what a solid bowl team is. Average 7-5, 6-6, 5-7. Below average, like a 4-win team, but they're feisty. And then trash 3-9, 2-10, and what have you. And we're just going to rapid fire go through this. Hopefully, maybe around 30 minutes, we will begin. This is all alphabetical too. So Air Force. I've got a very interesting relationship with Air Force when I kind of trollingly picked them to do well last year. I'm going to say the upper echelon of average. They started out 8-0. They kind of rage quit the season. They're, a 7 or 8 win team. The Mountain West is a decent conference. I might move them up. We'll see. Moving on to Akron. Akron's always horrible. I'm going to say trash. It's going to be hard to kind of rank some of these lower end mid-major teams because you want to put them all in trash, but some of them inevitably are going to win 5 or 6 games. So do I put those teams in average? I'll probably just put them all in below average, but Akron legitimately, they're normally always a 3 or 4 win team. Alabama. So Alabama losing Nick Saban, certainly somewhere in between lock and contender. Now Alabama has a top 3 most talented roster in college football. They returned Jalen Milroe. We know they lost Nick Saban. We know they lost Caleb Downs, Proctor, the offensive tackle, but they've got some decent players in the portal. I'm going to say right now playoff contender for Alabama. Upper echelon, I don't feel 1,000% confident about them being a lock for the playoff just because of the turnover in terms of the coaching situation. Appalachian State's a solid average team, kind of on par with Air Force, maybe slightly above average. Arizona, okay, now this is where it kind of gets annoyingly hard. Arizona in the SEC is probably like an average team or a solid bowl team, but the fact that they're in the Big 12, you kind of have to put them on the back end of playoff contender because of that auto bid in the Big 12. Arizona, unfortunately, losing their head coach. If that didn't happen, this would be a team everyone would be saying they're top 15, they're top 10. That kind of hurt them, back in January when that happened with the whole domino after Saban retired. But I'm going to say Arizona, top 2, top 3 team in the Big 12. They've got to be in the playoff contender tier because of that auto bid. Moving on to Arizona State. Arizona State at this point, I say quintessential below average team. We'll see what happens to them. You've got Arkansas, below average team. I am going to put them above Arizona State, but Arkansas, very similar. I believe they're losing KJ Jefferson, or did KJ Jefferson get another year? I could have dreamed KJ Jefferson got another year and then transferred or something. Next, you do have Arkansas State. Arkansas State towards the back end of below average. I do remember Arkansas State covering the spread against Ohio State last year, or that was 2 years ago with the Ohio State team with CJ Stroud. But yeah, Arkansas State, the Red Wolves are normally never good. You've got Army. I'm going to say Army, upper echelon of average, kind of similar. I'm going to say Air Force is better than Army next year. We will see. Very similar teams. Next, you have Auburn. Auburn going into next year, upper echelon of average, I'll say. The SEC, very tough conference with Oklahoma and Texas joining. Auburn has not trended in the right direction. I will say they are starting to really recruit better in state. With Saban gone, we'll see. Right now, they're on the upper echelon, of average. Ball State, quintessential below average MAC team. Next, you've got Baylor, below average. They did get DeQuan Finn, the transfer QB. Maybe you could bring them to average back end 5-6 wins. I like that. I like Baylor. They've struggled recently, but they get the transfer QB from Toledo who's been good. We'll see. Boise State, this is a very tough one because obviously we know the one auto bid from the group of 5. I think Boise State could possibly get it with Malachi Nelson, with the receivers they're bringing in. But it's like, can you really put them as a playoff contender? You really can't. It's hard to rank them because technically they are kind of a contender. They've got like a 16% chance, whatever. There's like 5 top group of 5 teams, I think, that are above everyone else in terms of possibly getting that auto bid. I'm going to say Boise State, very solid team right now. After firing their head coach last year, going on that run and finishing out the season really strong. Boston College, quintessential below average team. I'll put them like right here in front of some of the group of 5s, but behind teams like Arkansas. Next, you do have Bowling Green. So, I mean, credit to Bowling Green for kind of turning it around last year, but they're still a below average program. Buffalo, below average. BYU, they've got to be below average. They had a tough time their first year in a new conference in the Big 12. I will say it should get a little bit better. Their issues should be alleviated with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, but that's not going to solve, all of their problems. They don't recruit very well. The Big 12 is a complete mosh pit. They're probably destined for 5 and 7. Maybe I should move them to average, but at this point, I mean, we'll put them like right here, I'll say. Next it is Cal, below average team, joining a new conference. Weird situation with the ACC. They go right there in terms of below average. Central Michigan, below average team. We'll put them at the back end. Charlotte, maybe the most irrelevant team in FBS. No, but they're below average. Cincinnati, really tough first year in the Big 12. Should get a little bit easier. You lose Luke Fickell. They had the crazy run with Sauce Gardner, Desmond Ridder. It's just not happening right now. I'm going to say I like the pedigree of Cincinnati. I like the pedigree. I'm going to say upper echelon of below average, but it's not like they're recruiting any better in terms of that. Clemson, very tough one to rank because of the ACC situation, kind of a weak conference. I'm tempted to go playoff contender. I'm going to have to go right now. We're putting Clemson in the playoff contender tier. People underestimate how well they've recruited, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. Cade Klubnik back. He's got experience. I know he has not lived up to his 5-star name, but I like this Clemson team. They're sneaky. People that we're understanding Clemson's not this dynasty anymore. They've kind of lost that mystique, but now it seems like people are underrating them. That's an ACC that's kind of wide open with FSU losing a bunch of players. Back end of playoff contender because of the conference situation for Clemson and also their recruiting ability. Coastal Carolina, the great field. They lost Grayson McCall, but I have to give Coastal Carolina the courtesy. They're in a weaker conference. They've had a few nice seasons. We're going to say middle, maybe a little bit upper echelon of average. You could maybe argue solid bowl team, but they did lose Grayson McCall. Colorado, Deion Sanders. Back end of average. I can see Deion tacking on maybe 2 wins, maybe a 6-6 type season for them. Do something like that. Maybe move them in front of. I'll say average 6-6, maybe 7-5. We'll see what happens with Colorado, but I don't think they're going to be, a 9-3 team. The issue is that conference. I will say this. Colorado can pretty much win every game on their schedule in conference play, but they can also lose every game. It's just a conference that's so compact. You know what? Based on Colorado and just how much talent they have, I'm going to say upper echelon of average. I can see 7, maybe 8 wins with upside with Colorado, thinking through it. Colorado State, they're a below average team out of the Mountain West. Duke at this point, getting Murphy, the transfer, I'm going to say upper, they lost their head coach. Very tough. I'm going to say as a courtesy, because they had the upset win last year at Clemson, they're a program on the up. They get the transfer QB from Texas, the back end of average. They did lose their head coach to A&M, though. Moving on to Eastern Michigan, they're a below average team out of the MAC. East Carolina, I like their colors. We're going to move them up because of the colors, but they are below average. Florida Atlantic, kind of just another average team. Florida International, definitely one of the worst teams in college football. Maybe they turn it around, but at this point, you have to put them in the trash tier. Next, you do have Florida, quintessential average team at this point. Very tough out of the SEC, obviously. Very hard schedule. It's like their schedule is historically hard. I think they're the team that has the crazy tough schedule, but yeah, they're an average team. We'll see. They've got a big week 1 non-conference game coming up against Miami. Fresno State. Do I go solid bowl for Fresno State? They started off the year 4-0 last year. They were ranked. Or is it kind of an upper echelon of average? Right now, you got to go upper echelon of average. There's going to be teams in the solid bowl tier, but right now I would say Fresno State. Out of the Mountain West, you could argue solid bowl. It's iffy. We'll leave them right there. FSU, they've got to be a playoff contender. I will put them in front of Clemson as well. Probably, also in front of Arizona. So I like that ranking right now. FSU, they lost a lot. ACC still very winnable. DJ Uiagalelei, we'll see what happens with them. I'm actually really excited to see DJ Uiagalelei running the ball on 3rd and 4th and short. He's a big boy. He's going to cause some problems. FSU, the whole thing last year, them going undefeated, not getting in, very sad. Personally, I did agree with the decision just because the context of it, we saw FSU was probably not going to put up a fight in the playoff without Jordan Travis. But either way, Georgia Southern, they're actually not a bad team. I'm going to put them... it's just they're in a bad conference, so it's like, are they really better than Cincinnati? No, but because their conference is bad, they're probably an average team. Georgia State, typical below average team. Georgia Tech, they had a decent year last year. I'm going to say upper echelon of below average. I like them right next to Cincinnati and Arkansas. You could argue, based on like the last 3 or 4 years, they should be next to like Boston College. There's something about Georgia Tech I like. I don't know. Hawaii, I'm not going to say trash, but they've had a few real bad seasons. I'll put them towards the bottom with some of the MAC schools in terms of below average. Houston, it's unfortunate, but you got to go into the below average tier, joining the new conference. It didn't go well last year. Again, it should get better. The Big 12 is going to get worse, so that should help Houston. But at this point, they've had it. De'Aaron King, the decent run he had a few years ago. Illinois, below average. They had a run. I remember 2 years ago when they won 8 or 9 games, I said last year this team's going to be a fraud. People thought they were going to, continue that with Brett Bielema. I said no way, and they really struggled last year. They're a below average football team. Indiana is on the verge of trash. You could put them at the front end of it. It's hard because obviously Indiana's like a better program than Ball State, but because of their conference, they may only win 2 games. You have to kind of throw them into the trash tier. Here's a great solid bowl team. It's Iowa. So Iowa, getting the new offensive coordinator. We'll see how that works out. Love their safety, Xavier Nwakpa. Really unbelievable recruit. Losing Cooper DeJean is going to be tough, but I think Iowa, they're always going to have a solid defense. The big issue for Iowa, and this is all the Big Ten West teams, their schedules are going to get infinitely more tough. So Iowa should be a solid 8-win team, maybe a 7-win team, depending. Iowa State, I think they're just an average team. Maybe, Iowa State, I may have to put them in a solid bowl team. I liked Iowa State's offense last year. Surprisingly, Matt Campbell kind of reinventing himself. They had an explosive offense. I'm going to say solid bull for Iowa State. I think they've got a chance at 8, maybe 9 wins in a Big 12 conference where you're not going to get overpowered by any team there. Iowa State could win any one of those games. Kind of similar situation to Kansas State as well. Jacksonville State, just joining FBS, I'm going to say way down and below average. Although, to be fair, Jacksonville State had a better year than expected, but it's just they're in a tough, they're in a bad conference. It is what it is. What a weird logo this is for James Madison. So yeah, James Madison, I'm going to say right now, I like next to Fresno State. They're on the upper echelon of average. They started out the year last year amazing. Towards the end, they kind of lost steam. I need to see it again to really prove to me they could potentially be a solid bowl team. I'm not there yet with them. I like that. They're in the average tier. Kansas, wow. Kansas is very hard. So the Kansas situation is tough because they're not going to be at their home stadium. They're going to be at Arrowhead. They're going to be at an MLS stadium. I like Kansas, man. I really like Kansas. I think they're building something good there. Solid bowl team to me is like 8 wins, maybe 9 wins. I think they can reach that. I like Kansas. Solid bowl team for Kansas. Kansas State, very similar. Very similar. I like them as a solid bowl team. Kent State was the worst team in college football analytically. I think maybe they can be better than Florida International. That's a low blow to Florida International, but what are you going to do? We're going to leave Florida International down as the worst. Next you have Kentucky, another average SEC team. I'm going to put them below Florida just because I think Florida has more talent and upside. Next, you do have Liberty. Do you put them in? I can't put them in playoff contender. I know people will be like, well, they are technically a contender. We'll say they're a solid bowl team. They've got another horrible schedule. They're going to win a lot of games. I believe they return their quarterback. We know what happened last year. They had the worst schedule in all of FBS. They're rewarded with a New Year's Six game, and then they play that sham game against Oregon where, it's like 50% full. The game starts at 11 a.m. The ratings are terrible, and they lose like 44-6 against Bo Nix. Next, you have Louisiana. Louisiana is always okay, kind of similar to Georgia Southern. Yeah, Louisiana Tech, I would say upper echelon of below average. Louisville, Louisville had a very nice season. People say solid bowl team. I don't see it with Louisville. I'm not expecting a repeat performance. I think they're going to be average. I know the ACC isn't great. They should rack up 7 wins, but if you're going 7-5 in the ACC, to me, that's an average team. You're not making a solid bowl out of the ACC going 7-5, and I expect them to go around 7-5. LSU losing. I don't know what happened there. LSU losing Jaden Daniels, losing their top 2 receivers, Brian Thomas, along with Malik Neighbors. I'm going to say LSU at this point, they've got to go on the back end of playoff contender, even with all the losses. I know they're getting a new defensive coordinator. They've just got ridiculous talent. Remember, LSU can very easily lose 3 games and make the playoff very easily. I'm going to say maybe I might have to reformat this a little bit, do one of these. Do something like that. Yeah, do something like that in terms of the playoff contenders. They're squarely in terms of a playoff contender. They're not a lock, but they're in as a contender. These are getting hard to. I may have to actually minimize this. I actually am going to do that just to make it easier. Next, you do have Marshall. I like Marshall, but right now I would say, just kind of an average team at this point. Maryland losing Tonga Vailoa. I know he tried appealing it, getting another season. I think he was going to transfer anyways. They're like, without their starting quarterback, I'm going to say the back end of average, especially dealing with the newcomers to the Big Ten. The schedule's going to get harder. They're trending down at this point, in my opinion. Memphis, you can argue, is a playoff contender. I do think they could potentially make the playoff, but it's just I can't put them on the level with those other teams because it's a group of 5 situation. Well, I think Memphis is probably going to make it, honestly, be the group of 5 representative, but right now I have to say solid bowl for them. Miami, Miami's always a very hard one. They've got the NIL going. They've got a few more 5-stars coming in. At this point, the quarterback situation, kind of weird. I'm going to say Miami solid bowl team at this point. Just because I think Mario Cristobal at some point is going to turn it around. Miami of Ohio, somewhere in the below average tier, I'd say. Max school, towards the end. Michigan, I would say playoff contender at this point, very squarely. Even losing Harbaugh, losing McCarthy. They do return Donovan Edwards. They do return Colston Loveland. They do return Will Johnson. You've got to respect this team. They just won the national title. They went 15-0. I understand the cheating stuff, but still, I'm going to say squarely as a playoff contender, even with the losses. Michigan State, Aiden Childs, Jonathan Smith, upper echelon of average. I like what Michigan State, they got a lot better. They got very lucky with that Mel Tucker situation, getting out of that horrible, decade-long contract, the breach. I like Michigan State. I'm going to put them upper echelon of average. You could even maybe argue, if I really wanted to be a dark horse and say they're a solid bowl team, I think they could easily make a solid bowl. It depends how good Aiden Childs is. Minnesota, to me, trending down. I'm going to say upper echelon. Yeah, I like them with Cincinnati, Georgia Tech, teams like that. I'm going to say upper echelon and below average. You do have Mississippi State, very similar to these type of teams. Upper echelon, tough conference, 5 wins, maybe higher upside a little bit, maybe 5, maybe 6 wins. If they do get to 6 wins, they're an average team. Right now, I'm going to say upper echelon and below average. A lot of that has to do with conference, though. Missouri. I don't think Missouri's making the playoff. I know people are going to hate me for this. I'm going to say solid bowl. They're a solid bowl team. I think people are overinflating their win over Ohio State, where Ohio State had the debacle with their center not playing. They benched him, and then dealing with Lincoln Keenholz coming in after the Devin Brown injury. I think Missouri makes a good bowl. They win 8 games. The SEC is tougher. I know they've got Luther Burden. I get it. I just don't think they have the overall talent to have another 10-2 type season. If they do go 9-3, you could argue that they're a contender because it's not based off of my predictions. So you could say they're a contender, but I just don't think they're going to make the playoff, honestly. Middle Tennessee, kind of a below average team towards the end, I'd say. Navy's they're worse than Army. I'm going to say somewhere, in this tier below average. I like Navy, though, personally. We'll move them up a little bit. Here's a good one, NC State. So NC State is firmly in the solid bowl tier, and I would say a dark horse to potentially make the playoff out of the ACC. NC State's going to be ranked inside of the preseason top 25 poll. They return a ton. They're a solid bowl team right now. They can win 9 games for sure. If they win 9 games, they're not making the playoff. 9-3 out of the ACC will not make the playoff, but that will be a solid bowl for them. Kind of along the lines of your Missouris, your Boise States, your Iowas. I think they're better than Iowa. They've got more upside. Nebraska, possibly starting Dylan Raiola. High upside, I guess. He's a true freshman, though. Kind of similar to Maryland. Who knows? We'll throw them at the back end of average. Nevada's had a few really bad seasons. We'll throw them somewhere towards the end of below average. New Mexico, below average team. New Mexico State. You listen, if this was 2 years ago, New Mexico State would be right here. But New Mexico State's kind of turned their program around. They did lose their quarterback to the portal. I'll put them towards the end of below average still, even with their bowl appearance, even with that, bad conference. Northern Illinois had a nice, pedigree where they had a few seasons back in like 2012, 2013 where they had like double-digit wins. But at this point, they've really kind of slowed down, back end of below average. North Texas, high-octane offense, upper echelon of below average. Northwestern, I just can't do it. I know people are like, well, Northwestern had a good season. They went 8-5. They won their bowl game. The schedule is just going to get so much more harder. They don't have a stadium in 2024. They're going to be playing at Wrigley Field. I think they're a below average team in 2024 pretty firmly. I understand people say they had a good year last year. This is me predicting forward, so I put them there. Notre Dame, do I put them as my first playoff lock? I don't think you can. I'm going to say Notre Dame with Riley Leonard. They've got to be behind Michigan still. I have to respect Michigan, the national champions. Notre Dame, though, firmly could very easily make the playoff. A lot of people are predicting Notre Dame to make the playoff, very likely as around of a 9 or a 10 seed is what I'm seeing for most people. Some people have Notre Dame up to a 5 or a 6, but certainly they're normally one of the 12 teams. Notre Dame's situation is to the point where they go 10-2, and they are clearly in the playoff. Moving on to Ohio, another below average team, Ohio State. So this will be my first playoff lock. Ohio State, I would be completely shocked based on their roster talent, what they've brought in from the transfer portal, Judkins, Caleb Downs. It is ridiculously loaded. I understand people could say the quarterback, a little bit of a question mark. I get it, but Ohio State, I believe, is the only team that if we had went to a 12-team playoff starting in 2014 would make the playoff every single year. You could also argue Alabama. Alabama had one weird year where they finished 13th when really we all know they were better than that. So it probably would be Ohio State and Alabama, but Ohio State, to me, they're a playoff lock. I think they're guaranteed to make it. I'm going to actually have to probably zoom this out again just to fill all these teams in. Next, you do have Oklahoma. I am high on Oklahoma. They're getting better under Brett Venables, but the issue is the schedule is getting tougher. So I think Oklahoma is a high upside back-end playoff contender, but the schedule gets harder, joining the SEC infinitely harder, and they have the new quarterback Jackson Arnold and also an improving defense, so we'll see. They also have good recruiting classes, Oklahoma does, kind of an underrated team in terms of recruiting. Oklahoma State, back end of solid bowl. I know, Oklahoma State tends to make noise. They're a very strange team. They lost to South Alabama like 23-7, and they come back and, win 9-10 games. I'll say back end of solid bowl. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if they went 6-6, honestly. Old Dominion, somewhere in below average. It's just a conjumbled mess in terms of below average right now. Ole Miss, playoff contender for sure. Playoff contender. I would probably put them in front of LSU based on how much LSU loses. A lot of people think Ole Miss is going to make the playoff. They loaded up on the defensive side of the ball. They did have the weird situation, losing their number one running back, kind of some NIL stuff, but they also invested into NIL, getting Walter Nolan, getting a few other pass rushers, and now Lane Kiffin's actually got a defense. We'll see if they can put it together, and they're in the SEC. It's a tough conference, but I'm going to say playoff contender for them. You do have Oregon. Oregon is on the verge of being a playoff lock. Do I put them there? Those two teams are going to face each other, Ohio State at Oregon, in October. It's tough. Oregon's to me, a preseason top 5 team. I love Dylan Gabriel. I think he's a very underrated transfer portal QB. We'll leave them in locks right now. I might move them down. Yeah, I just don't know if I can put them, Ohio State has a transfer portal QB as well. I would just be shocked if Oregon missed it based on Dan Lanning, the pedigree, what they've done the past few years. I would say they're right on the verge. Oregon State at this point, it's unfortunate what happened to them, losing basically everyone. The easier schedule should help. I'll say somewhere in the average range, but it's going to be a completely different roster. They lost their number one quarterback and their number 2 quarterback. Penn State, they always, if we expanded to a 12-team playoff, they would have had like 5 appearances by now. They're definitely a playoff contender. I'll say they're right on par with Michigan and Notre Dame. I think that's a good spot for Penn State. Wouldn't surprise me at all. They're a 9 or a 10 seed. It also wouldn't surprise me if they missed out and they were like 13 or 14 and they get jumped by the group of 5 auto bid, because someone's going to, very likely get jumped by that team. Pittsburgh, to me, kind of an average team at this point. They need a new stadium badly. Purdue, I'm going to say upper echelon of below average with a team like Northwestern. It's just tough with the Big Ten getting tougher now. Rice is really bad. I'm not going to say trash for Rice, but they're definitely towards the end of below average with some of those other MAC teams. At this point, Rutgers is an improving program, but the Big Ten is also improving. I'm going to say I'm going to say right on par with some of these other teams. You could argue, well, Louisville's better than them. Okay, we'll put Louisville in front of them. Yeah, they need to move back a little bit. I agree. But Rutgers, they've been better recently. I'm going to actually move Rutgers down a little bit, but somewhere in the average range. Still ahead of Nebraska. I mean, this is just a conjumbled mess. It's very hard to rank this many teams. Sam Houston just joining FBS, they were really bad. They started like 0-9 or something. They're definitely below average. San Jose State, love the logo. Decent team. I could see them winning 6 games. We'll say upper echelon and below average. San Diego State at this point, a 6, Mountain West, do they make a solid bowl? I'm going to say somewhere in the upper echelon of average. You do have SMU, very interesting. Preston Stone, is he going to be healthy? They possibly could have made, a New Year's Six bowl if their quarterback didn't get injured. They're joining a Power 5 conference, or at least at this point, a Power 4 conference in the ACC. It's tough. It's tough with SMU. You know what? Because I put Oklahoma State, they're joining a better conference. It's hard for me to put them there. I'm going to say upper echelon of average. South Alabama's a good team. People don't realize South Alabama is a good program. Right now, in their conference, certainly they're good, but do we really think they're going to make like a really good bowl game? I think maybe upper echelon of average. I like South Alabama a lot. South Carolina, they're your quintessential average team. Unfortunately, they're in the SEC, so they may only win 4 or 5 games. Southern Miss, below average team. Stanford joining the ACC at this point, a clear below average team. Recruiting's not getting any better. Syracuse with Kyle McCord, very easy schedule. Be interesting with Syracuse, very easy schedule. I'm going to say somewhere in the middle of average. I mean, but with their schedule, you could say probably a 7-5, 8-4 team just because of how easy it is, but we'll put them somewhere up here in terms of average. TCU, I think TCU is decent. I know people have this vendetta against them because they made the national title and then they went 5-7. Analytically, TCU was a really good team. I'm going to say I like TCU. We're going to put them upper echelon of average. You do have Temple. Temple's a bad team. You do have Tennessee. Say back end of... Listen, Tennessee will be interesting with Nico Laman-Leva. They just win the major case against the NCAA. That should give them momentum. They definitely have more talent than some of these other teams. I'm going to be moving them in front of some of these teams, though. We'll move Kansas back there. We'll move Tennessee right here. We'll move Tennessee right here. We'll move Tennessee right here. Move Tennessee right there. I like Tennessee. I'm high on Tennessee in that offense. That we'll see what happens with Laman-Leva, the superstar young quarterback. You do have Texas A&M. Very similar situation to we're gonna put them in Miami right next to each other. These are talented rosters. They are. A&M's lost a lot in terms of Jimbo Fisher leaving, the portal, Walter Nolan leaving, Stewart leaving, the 5-star receiver, but still a very talented roster, I think. But I don't know. Will they make a solid bowl? It's hard, man. Maybe back end of solid bowl. Texas. Is Texas seriously a playoff lock at this point? I don't think I can do it. Playoff locks are, it'd be hard to see Texas missing the playoff. They do have that non-conference game against Michigan. They lose that game. That's 1 loss. They're in an SEC schedule. You've got Oklahoma. You lose to Oklahoma. That's 2 losses before you really even get to the meat of the SEC schedule. I don't know. Texas is close to a playoff lock. If I'm going to have Texas as a playoff lock, I'm going to also have to have Oregon as well. But it's hard for me. Yeah, no, listen, if there's 12 playoff spots, a lot of these teams are pretty much guaranteed to make it. But then I'd also probably have Alabama as a lock, but that's too many. Texas State, come on. Texas Tech, it's not going to happen. Remember Texas Tech when they were ranked? No, Texas Tech got a nice stadium renovation. I'm going to move them up to like, this is an improving program. I think Texas Tech's a dark horse, but I can't do it right now. But I will rank them in front of Fresno State. Toledo, they lose Finn, their quarterback. They're on the upper echelon of below average. I'll say that much. Troy is a solid team. They've got a good defense. I like them next to Coastal Carolina. Tulane. What do you do with Tulane? Tulane's gotten some transfers. They got to go next to Memphis, right? They should make a solid bowl. They might be possibly also making the playoff as the auto bid from the group of 5, but right now I have to throw them in solid bowl. Tulsa's a bad football team, folks. Just throw them in there. UAB, we're going to throw them towards the upper echelon of below average. UCF, middle of average right now. It's unfortunate. UCLA, losing Chip Kelly. I don't know what they're doing. They hired someone. People are not happy. We're going to say, well, listen, with their conference now in the Big Ten, yeah, they're probably going to win 4 or 5 games. We'll see. Although, you know what? You can't just do that. They're better than some of these teams. We're going to move them up. It's hard to rank these teams because they're in different conferences, but I'm going to have to zoom out again. All right, we're almost done. UConn. Boy, UConn used to be down here. UConn's still not a good football program. Georgia, we've got another one. Now, you can argue which way this should go. Is Georgia number 1? Is Ohio State number 1? But let's be honest. Georgia at this point, based on their pedigree, based on the 2 national titles, based on the fact that, let's be honest, they were probably one of the 2 best teams last year. They destroy FSU. I know FSU wasn't playing anyone, but still. Georgia's a powerhouse. Georgia and Ohio State, to me, are my 2 just auto locks. Whether you want to include these 2 teams, it's debatable. But Georgia and Ohio State are auto locks. Those are the 2 auto locks for the 12-team playoff. You could also think about including Oregon and Texas. UL Monroe, throw them in. UMass, they're always terrible. We're going to keep them in front of Florida International, but they got to go in the trash category. UNC, losing Drake May, but they've been a program on the up and up. I'll give them average at this point. I can respect it. How about UNLV? What a season they had last year. I respect it. I don't know if I can say, what do we quantify as a solid bowl? I also don't know what UNLV... If UNLV returns their quarterback, I'd throw them in solid... Yeah, we'll leave them there. I'm feeling charitable. USC, everyone kind of doubts USC because of the conference, because of the defense. I think USC is going to be a very solid bowl team. I think they win 8 games. That's good in the Big Ten. They're going to win 8 games. Miller Moss, the defense, Zachariah Branch, the superstar receiver, they recruit really well. South Florida... South Florida, they're getting the new stadium. I'm going to say upper echelon and below average. Utah, here's another one. Very similar situation to Arizona. These are the 2 teams out of the Big 12 you do have to put into playoff contender. And they weren't even in, these are Pac-12 teams, but they're joining an easier conference now with Cam Rising coming back. And I do have to kind of defend Cam Rising. I know everyone says, well, Cam Rising, he's back for his 8th year. I believe this is only his 3rd year where he's starting. So, and I'm not this big Cam Rising fan. I think he's kind of overrated, but, I understand he's old, but it's still only his 3rd year. He's been injured a lot. Utah State, they're not good. Remember Jordan Love, though? UTEP, my goodness. UTSA, the Alamo Dome. Solid program, UTSA. Upper echelon of average. I like UTSA. Vanderbilt, you got to throw them down here. They're the one SEC. Yeah, they got to be worse than Indiana as well. Virginia. They had a really good receiver last year, but they are not a very good program. Virginia Tech, underrated. Very underrated team. Do I do a solid bowl? I think it's possible. I could see a matchup in a solid bowl game between I don't know if they're going to win. I can't see them winning 9 games. And then if they win 8 games, I don't think they're going to get into a great bowl. ACC, 8-game win. Yeah, I mean, the ACC is kind of an easier conference. I don't know. I like Virginia Tech. They get their quarterback back. They're very similar to MSU. It's close. Wake Forest is just not a good team. They're similar to Virginia. Washington, I'm expecting a huge step back. I respect them, though, so I'll put them in the upper echelon of average. But, guys, it's not that I think South Alabama would beat Washington. It's based off of the conferences. You have to understand that. but I will put them, I'll move them up here because I respect what they did last year, going 14-0, making the national title. Washington State, I think you got to kind of put them in the same category as Oregon State. I can't find Oregon State, folks. Where did Oregon, whatever. Next, you've got West Virginia. West Virginia kind of had an under the radar year last year. We're going to say average team, but kind of under the radar. Oh my God, this is a horrible logo. Western Michigan, below average. Wisconsin, it's very tough. You know, they're trying to build something with Luke Fickell. I get it. Your schedule's about to get really tough. I'm going to say average. I mean, they also face Alabama at home. That's interesting. No, but they have a good pedigree. I like them. I'm going to put them above MSU. MSU's got to prove it to me that they're, you know, with their new quarterback and head coach. Next, you do have Western Kentucky. Below, you know, they're an air raid team. We'll throw them there. And then Wyoming. What do you do with Wyoming? Put them right there. All right, well, that's basically the tier list of every team. Again, it's not that I think, you know, a lot of this is based off a conference. So, like UNLV and Washington, if they matched up, I'd probably pick, Washington or Wisconsin. I'd probably pick those teams to beat UNLV, but UNLV in their conference, they can make a solid bowl game. I do like this list. It's fine. You know, you rapid fire go through it, but you could make an argument that Alabama's a playoff lock. I just have, if they had Nick Saban, they'd be a playoff lock, absolutely. You know, Ohio State, I don't think you can argue it. Georgia, you cannot argue it. Oregon is getting to the point where they're a playoff lock in a 12-team format. And I don't think you can have Michigan there. If they still had Harbaugh and McCarthy, then yes. Penn State, you can't put them there. Notre Dame, you just can't. So I think for playoff locks, it's an exclusive club. You know, it's an exclusive club to make sure teams are going to make it, and it needs to mean something, that category. So that would be my ranking of 133 teams, and then Kennesaw State, I would put them in below average, in between Cal and Old Dominion. That's going to do it for this video, guys. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.